Yes, welcome. This is A RAP CRITIC. I'm your boy Malik 16, and no, it ain't rough, but it is right. And it's super right because I got my ace, I got my homie, I got my family here. And I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
Word. So I'm Indigo Nicole, depending on how and when you know me. I'm an all-around creative. Who went to art school, right? And I worked in radio for like over 10 years. Come from a musical family, so it's ingrained, a musical family that's really in, the industry in different ways for a few decades. So I was born into this thing. And that's where some of my valid opinions come from. And also, I am a brand strategist, by day, by trade, and a burgeoning filmmaker, which I'm working on my first film, which is going to be rooted in hip hop. And that's all I'll say for now because it's in the works, and I want to keep it quiet until I'm ready to really spread the word.
All right. So yeah, this is a celebratory kind of occasion for me because I get to do it with my homie who's also a pro and also a queen, which is only fitting in the month that has been deemed Women's History Month, and we're talking about a queen doing queen things. So it's only right that we go into the album that we're talking about today, which is Black Rain by Queen Latifah, none other. And just so happens that this album is turning 30 this year. So this is category 1, where we go over the album, the product itself. Just a little background on this album. It was released when, Indy?
November 16th, 1993.
And if you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. And with no further ado, while you do that, we're going to pop on into the first dimension of category 1, which is dimension 1, the quality of the production. So there's 3 main producers on this album. We have Tony Dofat, who's a producer who's been mostly associated with Heavy D, but made a slight reemergence in the early 2000s via Diddy. So it's that Mount Vernon connection. Then we have, going all the way to Long Island, Sidney Reynolds, better known as SID, featured prominently on the production on this album. Those are going to be your 2 main producers. And then last but not least,
KG. Nobody.
Right. Yeah. So keeping that in-house flavor unit Jersey connection going. And what can you say about the sounds that you hear on this album and the style of production?
The sound is definitely 90s, right? She definitely has, your boom bap on there. The drums, many of the drums that you'll hear, in the 90s. I mean, it's definitely jazzy. Definitely got that 90s tapping into the saxophone.
Early
90s, because we're still talking about 93, right? So early 90s, this is a time where, Diggable Planets is also coming out, 93, right? Jazzmatazz, the volume 1, first one comes out 93. So it's right in the vibe, in the mix of that era. That is like, wait a minute, we tap it in on purpose to the jazz, lineage, right?
Yeah, I would go as far to say this was the last strong year for jazz influenced hip hop to be the leading sound. It was
last year.
Because think about
into the Rolodex, historical Rolodex. It definitely was the time. 93, yeah.
Yeah, and so this year it was still the leading sound. The biggest albums this year, besides Snoop's and Wu-Tang's, were the jazzy albums. Midnight Marauders, right? That's the defining jazzy rap classic, along with what Guru was doing, Diggable was doing, even some of Souls of Mischief stuff was jazzy. And Naughty's album was jazzy because this is all from the same camp. But right after this year, it shifted to think of the stuff that came out in 94. It was definitely more just like hard. Everything was hardcore. Everything.
And that's why 94 is a defining year because that shifts. I agree with you.
Yeah, there were no jazz instruments on Biggie's first album, for instance. And
other than his voice. Wait a minute, hold on. I'm gonna ask, or is it a certain type of jazz sound that it
of course. We're talking about.
I think that's that.
I think when and you're right, we need to be clear when we're saying jazz, because I think sampling, jazz influence that's never going anywhere, right? It's a wealth of music to sample from when we're talking about collecting from jazz, but where hip hop was going through its obvious jazz movement. Like we're using distinct jazz bass lines and distinct horns that you only hear in jazz music, kind of stuff.
And I think that's it, because the albums that we just mentioned and the songs, they're dominant with the saxophone, right? There's whole jazz albums that are piano, right?
Yeah.
You think about the individual instruments. So I think the horn the horn was dominant.
Yeah.
And keys.
And the bass line. The bass line. This album is not key heavy. This album relies on horns almost in every beat, except for except for a few. I think almost every beat has a horn. Different kinds of horns, but all from an obvious jazz place. So even if we take a track like, which was supposed to be the hardcore track, Rough, that blaring, and that's such an early 90s sound. I feel like so many rap tracks had that.
That might be, honestly, for me, that's the most 90s song on the album.
Oh, yeah.
Like, hands down. The fact that it's called Rough. Anytime you say rough, rugged, and raw, it's absolutely 90s all day, right? And then you have the horn, the way it's played, and then the energy of it. That's the epitome of the 90s, of that time in the 90s.
But then on the flip, you get a track like Can't Understand, which was the B-side, the A-side, B-side single. And it's still blaring horns, but they're just more upbeat and supposed to be less like siren-like, right? So it's that's also a super early 90s sound to me, coupled with, I think the bass lines create the mood, right? So the Rough track was supposed to give you a more gritty, murky bass line. The Can't Understand was supposed to give you a more bouncy bass line, Moaning in the Middle style. Just that sound. This is my up-tempo track. That was the bass line that you hear on a lot of up-tempo tracks of that era. Is that's what I think about when I think of early 90s, especially New York hip-hop. It's a Listen to Me is your moodier kind of use of horn instrumentation. And then, of course, you have to bring up U.N.I.T.Y, which is the epitome of moody jazz horn, even saxophone. And I do think that saxophone is probably the riskiest instrument to use in a hip-hop track because you have to be strategic with it. And this album contains one of the two most famous uses of a saxophone in a hip-hop track. And it was just well done.
For you, why is it risky?
It's risky because everything that we just talked about.
Take what Kendrick might have in his records, right? The instruments are there, but you're not associating them necessarily outright with U.N.I.T.Y or outright.
I think his music gets thrown in a similar batch. I feel like when people hear those instruments, the critique you'll get is I have to be in a certain mood to listen to those Kendrick songs, as opposed to most other contemporary rap that doesn't use that sound just got buried in time, unfortunately. Like, besides Kendrick, think of the last time you heard a saxophone in a hip hop track. And we're not talking about obscure. I know Joey Badass might have, a deep cut, an album track. When artists feel like they need to get artistic and have songs that have extended time and music breaks, you might get that, especially the artistic rappers. But it has no place. It hasn't had a place in hip hop since, I think, about 94. It's really an instrument that's died out. What'd you say?
No, I said that's an interesting take. U.N.I.T.Y being led by, a jazz horn and still being a classic still to this day, and people tapping into it. And, I think all the elements in that song allow it to still be that classic. Like, it comes in with the horn, but that horn is dope. That horn is dope.
That's what
right?
I'm saying. I think
Right.
that's your point. Your point is how it's played, and that's
Mhm.
why I said that statement about it's a risky instrument because you have to be strategic and you got to stand on it. This decision because you have to know when to bring it in, and you got to be damn sure that this melody is going to capture people. Otherwise, it's like, is that a saxophone?
I mean, Queen Latifah, when she starts to sing the hook, U.N.I.T.Y, it complements the horn. It's
Oh,
almost like they're up there with each other. It's like da-na-na-na, and then she's like U.N.I.T, like, you
yeah.
know, I don't know all the technical terms when it comes to like the vocals and all of
Neither
that
do
stuff.
I,
Like
sis.
they're on the, it seems like they're almost on the same level, pitch, something, right?
Mhm.
So if they're not in competition, the two sounds, like she helps continue to elevate.
So when we say this, we mean that these are melodies and sounds that are closely associated with that era of jazz, right? Because I think you pointed out that, yeah, new jazz may not tap into that, even though I think there's some sounds that are just forever jazz, like that's just their staple. Just like there's some sounds that are forever funk. You know, like a wah-wah guitar, it's hard to associate that with anything else. It's like, right? This was the sound. This was the era. I can't think of a track on here that deviates from that, except for No Work, which KG samples the classical 2, that go-to hip-hop sample, damn near breakbeat at this point in hip-hop. But what KG did was like this masterful workaround. He played the notes in reverse, so it wasn't
That's obvious.
It was like the backwards melody of that, and it still kept the same, but the drums are different on there than any other track on it. Probably the most hip-hop drums on the whole album, because they like snap, they have a snap to them, which keeps it it's really a mid-tempo beat, but it has an up-tempo feel, because once those drums mixed with that melody, mixed with the way the Queen approached it, it feels like it's energetic as all get out. So yeah, I'm thinking even though Weekend Love is supposed to have this reggae vibe, it's at its core a jazzy kind of bounce. It reminds me of when jazz singers do reggae influence sounds,
or reggae artists do jazz or R&B songs, right? And it is at that intersection.
Just Another Day may be the only track, and maybe parts of Mood Is Right, where you take a break from the horns, because Just Another Day is such a muted beat, and you know, it took a minute for me to realize that it's just a stripped down sample of Making Love in the Rain by Herb Alpert.
Yep.
Features
Janet Jackson, and I forgot the other woman's name.
Lisa Keith.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the quintessence of sampling. When you're able to sample in a way where you give the track its own identity, it's not the first thing I associate with, because we've heard that beat sample. We heard that song sampled blatantly on Days of Our Lives, ironically on the Set It All soundtrack by Bone Thugs and Harmony, which is now one of their like most memorable songs. But this track, it takes a trained ear to realize it's from the same song. So shout out to Sid, he did his thing on it. It's a subdued beat, but it winds up being one of the most gangster tracks in hip hop history.
He's the one that maintains that energy with the songs that have that energy on the album.
The hip hop energy, or the mellow
energy? That mellow energy.
Yeah, because he did.
I think he does it the most in the album.
Even though Dofat did the Listen to Me, which I think is the other most mellow but hard track. That's the thing with Just Another Day. It's mellow, but it's hard. It's one of the most easily recognizable tracks as soon as it comes on. I think the decision to pair those drum hits with that bass line and the way it just kind of flows, it has an airiness to it. And that's even without the vocals. The vocals just, of course, just add to the atmosphere of it. But there's something ethereal and somber at the same time about that beat. What I'm surprised by is the range that you get from such a limited scope, right? If we're talking about an album that's predominantly jazz bass lines and jazz horns, they really run the gamut with those sounds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so we'll talk more about that in the next dimension, but these are all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the quality of the production on this album. Indigo, what are you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5 when we talk about the quality of the production?
5 being the most? Mm-hmm. Is that it? I might it's a solid album. I either want to give it a 3 or 4.
You can do 3.5.
I'm straddling somewhere between there, huh?
You can do 3.5.
I think I feel safe and say 3.5.
Okay. That takes us to dimension 2, the cohesiveness of the production on this album. Now, how well does it all go together? How many tracks are on this album?
It was like 16 or something like that. I think.
Here I am thinking you got
15. No, I did. I was like, it's either 15 or 16. It's 15. It's 15.
Okay. 15 tracks. They're all musical. And I was surprised by the DJ break because most DJ breaks that I've heard on albums are like energetic and annoying. There's a bunch of sounds and scratches, and this also had a moodiness to it. For the DJs, I think it's called.
I think that's. Oh, I forgot which one that was.
No, the second one is called Just the Flow.
Right. Okay. And you know what, the DJ that interlude, the first one you're talking about, that one has a nice energy to it. It's a nice segue. Like, yeah. I remember listening to it when I was growing up, and it's the interlude you need when you're like vibing to the song and you need to go to the next room.
Right. And other albums that have featured DJ segues tend to be throwaways. Actually, right. In most hip hop like magazine reviews, you see the journalists rip those apart. And I think of even, dare I say it, Eric B. and Rakim albums. Most reviews called the Eric B portions and contributions filler, because it's just like, I don't know if we want to hear these 3 minutes of scratches and, where this blended in and it still kept the musicality of the album. And so even Just the Flow, where it sounds like Queen Latifah's freestyling, it's not a disruption. It's a nice segue before she switches the tone of the album, the topics and stuff. And so all together, we start off and we end. Tell me if you peep this. We begin and we end with songs that are essentially dedicated to a brother.
Yep.
Right? So
he talks him out at the very beginning, and the whole song, the last song, is about him. It's dedicated to him. When
the movie Set It Off came out 3 years later, I thought the first thought I had is that they named it off of that first song, because as I remember when I was younger, I thought the song was called Set It Off because she winds up saying set it off as much as she says the black hand side part of the
hook. Mine just blown. I didn't even think about that till just now, and I'm hearing it going through it in my head. I'm like, yo, he's right.
There's no other track on the album like it. It starts with that super recognizable, undeniable Isley Brothers sample, the Hello, It's Me, with a hip hop update. And so it uses a piece of the cheat code where it's riding the energy of an easily familiar, easy to get into song, but it sets the tone in a way where it's mid-tempo, but it feels up-tempo because of the song as a whole. And that's kind of the vibe of this whole album. There's probably only 2 that are straight up-tempo. Most of the album's mid-tempo, but depending on the energy that Queen puts behind it, they feel more bombastic.
Yeah, I mean, Black Hand Side is like a perfect intro song. It has certain elements, like the timing of it, where like, ooh, baby, like you hear the conversation. It's just enough. It doesn't annoy you. It's not too much talk. Yes. Like it's just enough. It's just enough interaction. Then you get the first instruments. Then you get the drum. You get the hand claps. You get the sample, and it's like it gives you this nice space between each one, and then you're in it. And then you're in it. It's like, this is a song. Okay.
Right. And it's a selfless act. She dedicates the first verse to New Jersey and her brother, right? And that's how the album ends. She's speaking mostly about herself, but she's singing to her brother and for her brother. That she's incorporating some spirituality in there, and so those are the thought processes that she wants to lead you and send you off with. And in the middle, you get all of these other dimensions. And I do think one thing when we always talk about sequencing is what comes up in this dimension. What an interesting choice, one, to put one of the most mellow tracks right after the lead off single, which set the tone for the album. I thought it had a brilliance to it, because you kind of needed that to remind you that, oh, it's still real. Listen to Me is, as much as it's jazzy, it's pure hip hop. It's not it's not a hardcore track, but because it's a more mellow beat and a more stripped down beat, it is one of the harder tracks on the album. And I thought following the song like Black Hand Side, which is not a happy song, but not a hardcore song and not a moody song. It's just, it's a just right song. It gives you a nice contrast, because then right after that, you do get your upbeat, happy, bouncy song with I Can't Understand, right? And I wish more albums had this kind of sequence, because I used to think the 90s formula is that you have to put all your singles, like those are the first songs, which is, to me, a trash formula, because if you're not familiar, you know, like a lot of casual listeners do, okay, I heard the songs I know, and then the rest go to the wayside. Here, she puts two of her singles in the front, in the first three songs, and then her other three singles are on the tail end of the album. I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. It's brilliant.
The sequencing reminded me, the harmoniousness of some of the, well, just sequencing was similar to Miseducation, or I should say Miseducation was similar to this one.
How so?
And because, like you just said, you have a great opener, right? Like recognizably hip hop, which was same thing with Lauren, right? What we wanted to hear from her for a long time. This was the debut. This was like her thing, you know, her thing solo, and it was like, oh shit, she came with it, right? And then what was the biggest critique? She sings too much on the damn album, right? The point where, you know, I think the interludes play the role of shifting the energy. There's only two, and they literally, because of that, I think I hear the album in like 3 parts.
Right, and
somewhat similar to like to Miseducation, because after a certain point, the second half of the album is more Lauren singing, which is similar to like Latifah here. Like she's singing a hook, you hear her throughout, but that second half, way more mellow.
Yeah,
way more mellow.
And now that I think about it as an analog, like the second song on Lauren's album is X Factor, right? So right after Lost One,
they're similar in that way.
Right. So like if we're talking about number 2, it's like yeah. So I think another choice, just like the saxophone, another choice you only make when you're confident in your product. You're like, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. I'm not gonna lose anyone with this track. I'm gonna bring the energy right back up with the next track. And she does that even with the 3 singles towards the end. Weak in Love being the most upbeat out of that trilogy. Just Another Day being the most, you know, mellow. And then U.N.I.T.Y is in the middle. It has that mid-tempo feel with up-tempo energy. And so in the middle, you get taken through all those different tones. You get rough, you get Bring the Flavor, you get No Work, Superstar. No track here disrupts the flow. You know, this is not an album where you get a track in the middle that's a record scratch. It's just like, you know, you took me out my zone. She keeps her most experimental track as the last song, and I think that was a conscious decision. Not only did she want you to leave with this note that she's dedicating this to her brother, she's like, oh no, this is my jazzy side, and that's the track that's credited with her being the producer. And you can tell it's a live band instrumentation. We've been talking about jazz this whole time. Queen goes full jazz on that song. She is the only hip hop element on that track. So it might as well be Cassandra Wilson. Even when the beat changes, even when the instrumentation and the stanza changes, it speeds up in jazz timing, it slows down in jazz timing. So she leaves the most experimental track for the end, unless you argue that Weak in Love is an experimental track. But These are all things to consider: the sequencing and the listenability, for lack of a better word, of this album from start to finish. On a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Cohesiveness, what you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5?
I'm gonna give it a 4.
Okay, that takes us to dimension 3, the intentional mood and tone of this album. Now, what do we think Queen was trying to convey sonically and lyrically? Like, what was the feeling that this album gave? And this is always tricky because this is not so much a question of what feeling do you get when you listen to this. This is the idea of what feeling does the music give? What do you think it's trying to emanate?
Her intentions and like where she was and how it showed up in the sound.
Yes.
Right? Because like, you know, her brother passed away. Right? And I think 2 things. Her brother passed away, 1. And then 2, her looking at her first 2 albums, you know, the energy of those albums, which was much more upbeat, right? She was transitioning. I think there were life things going on that she deliberately wanted to show another side of herself, that she didn't want to be pigeonholed. And that showed up in the energy of the album. You know,
I agree.
Somebody said, I think I either heard her in an interview or read it where like she was going out for like roles, like, you know, acting, and they were still giving her like Nature of a Sister, Queen Latifah, and she was like, this is not the depth of who I am, you know. And so I think it was a deliberate effort, you know, along with her Flavor and Unit crew, you know, to make sure that those parts of her that she wanted to showed up in this album.
Yo, I agree with everything you said. I think it's evident. She was showing more dimensions of herself. There's a fullness to this album. There's never an air of pretense with a Queen project, but there's a fullness that happens sonically. The sounds are robust here. The musicality is at a higher level, and she is showing you soft. She's showing you rough, because that was also a trend that was big in hip hop at that point, and we laughed at the use of the word rough because it's such a 90s word. But
rough, rugged, and raw.
This was the era where everyone had to have a rough song. This is the legacy of gangster rap entering the climate and changing the atmosphere. It's like, oh, you got to have at least one rough song. All of her elements, she's showing all of her elements on one album in a way that's more complete than ever before. And also positioning herself to be seen as a boss in a different dimension. Not I'm a queen just because I say my name is a queen and I wear this headdress that makes me queen. It's like, no, you could see me as the owner of this management company, soon to be a label, soon to be a production company.
And I think in her words though, she said it was darker. And in contrast to the first 2 albums, it is darker.
Absolutely.
Right? Because she was like, you know, with her brother dying, that being pivotal. Again, first song, last song, right? That energy. She's in a different energy. She's also going from being a teenager, now she's a young woman. Like, she's going through very critical life shifts. And it's going to show up in the sounds. It's going to show up.
Absolutely. And hip hop is changing. So there's this push to have darker music, have moodier music, and more musical, layered music. Not layered in the way that the DJs of the past were the producers, and they would mix different James Brown scratches and samples. So not layered in like a Prince Paul production way, but layered texture wise, and that's what we're getting. So these are all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about how the intentional mood and tone came across on this album.
Intentional mood and tone. I'm gonna give it a 5.
All right. Okay.
I'm gonna give it a solid 5.
Takes us to dimension 4. Song distinction versus repetition of words and sounds. So as much as those same instruments get used, the same kind of production gets used, each producer has their own distinct approach to it. Dofat's tracks don't really sound like KG's tracks, which don't really sound like Sid's tracks. Well, we mentioned how, you will hear recurring instrument sounds in the lead. Do you ever get a feeling of redundancy from that?
Like there's times I listen to the album and try to see if I can tell who's who at the different times, right? It's easy to do that because it's not current, right? So I'm like, okay, which sound was that? I can always tell Dofat's songs.
Wow.
And this is not a bad critique, but his sound the most like the time.
Yeah, I can say that.
Like 93, right? Yeah. Not that the other two don't sound like that time, but his is the most of the time sounds, right? Maybe that has to do with which instruments used at certain times, and everything. But yeah, that was one thing I definitely picked up. KG, it always reminds me of Naughty. So it's definitely not hard to pick him out, pick his sounds out.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it in one of the earlier dimensions. Sid, out of everyone, maintains that hip hop feel and the moodiness feel. So Sid is almost the heartbeat of this album. And so I shout him out again because it's just not a name you hear in hip hop a lot. And he's still out there doing his thing. He's a member of a production team called the Superiors that are out here making tracks for some of the new wave of rappers and still out here doing it. So and not in a unknown way, like big names. So yeah, I do think there may be one or two tracks, and we can talk about this when we get to Dimension 7, that might feel like, okay, I've heard this feel, and I think the interludes might also add to that weight too. So
sure. The interludes are of the time. That's hands down.
If the interludes weren't there, it'd be easier to kind of distinguish too. So they help with if you do get a redundancy effect here, they help add to it. So like just the flow doesn't really help take that feeling away. So if you take just the flow off, then that's one less of that sound. Because I do think there's a big distinction on the majority. There's no other song here that sounds like Can't Understand. There's no other track here that sounds like Just Another Day. There's no other track that sounds like No Work or Mood Is Right. But there could be a natural wear down of jazziness after a while. If you feel that way. I don't know if the redundancy factor is high on the production. Now, if we talk about the words that Latifah uses, with some words that we're going to hear used multiple times on this album. There's intentional repetition and then there's lazy repetition, right? There's branding. On the intentional side, Flavor Unit, because she's trying to remind you, yes, I'm a boss.
Flavor Unit.
Yeah. She's saying it in all different kinds of ways. She's spelling it out. This is also maybe the last year and era of it being cool to spell things out in your raps. But Jersey. Oh, and that's intentional. That's intentional and not lazy. So I'm trying to think of some laziness. She does mention Apache 2 times, but that's just bigging up. Fellow friend, crew member, and artist. I don't know. I don't hear a lot of lyrical repetition here. So,
I had theme repetition, but no specific words.
Theme repetition is expected on hip hop albums. This is not any more thematically repetitive than any other hip hop album. You're expected to get 7 songs about wrecking crews and being a better rapper than other rappers. The gem is, what you balance it with, which takes us to the next dimension. So this is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the repetition of words and sounds and how much the songs are distinguished from each other. What are we giving this on the scale from 1 to 5?
Song distinction? 4. Let's do 4.
4? Okay. We go into dimension 5, the amount of songs versus the amount of content. So we're talking ratios here. There's the same balancing act that it manages to do with mood, tone, and with that production range, with those limited sounds. I think it pulls off the same way with the content. It's like just when you need Queen to step out of one space, she steps into another space without you having to ask her. She's like, okay, here's 2.5 songs, time to, you know, go into something else.
No, I totally agreed. You know, the sequencing connected to the content is you know, hand in hand. Totally agreed. She was talking about, like, again, when she gets into her rough and rugged and raw songs that ironically are also features too. You know, then she switches and gets that soft side, right? Yeah. There's a few angles of her soft side that we see.
Angles is such a good word, because I don't think enough credit is given in hip hop to the magic of a song that is loosely topical. So we think about a song like Black Hand Side. Black Hand Side, the second verse is all her going in, braggadocio, going in on other rappers and other people in the industry. The first verse is a reintroduction. Hey, I'm back. This verse is dedicated to my brother. Here's how we grew up together. And so there's like 3 or so songs on the album like that. And I was just talking about this in the Nipsey Hussle episode. He's good for that. You know, instead of a song that's like, this is my political song, he's going to give you a song where one verse might be political as hell. Then the next song he's talking about is set, but it helps.
It helps on my hat, right?
Right. Yeah, you see him rocking it. So, you know, the marathon continues. But yeah, artists who are able to do that in between giving you the songs that are definitely about something. There's a bobbing and weaving throughout this entire album of songs that have topical aspects and angles, and then songs that are flat out about something, interspersed with these braggadocio raps to remind you that Queen was one of the women in hip hop who laid the ground for this, and they're those reminder songs. So
I can't understand is epitome of that. Each verse is literally distinctly like talking about something totally different. She can't understand all 3 of the things.
Right. So all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5. Heartbeats, the amount of songs versus the amount of content.
The amount of songs versus the amount of content. 3.54.
4, okay.
Solid, yeah.
And that takes us to the next dimension. It's the big one, dimension 6, the features. Who we got on this album?
Who doing? Let me see my fingers. Well, obviously Tretch, right? We got well, I'm forgetting everybody now. KRS is on here. KRS-One, Tony Rebel, of course. Damn, I gotta go through the whole list now.
You got Heavy D.
Heavy D. Now she mentions Apache. Apache's, well, he's not on here. But damn.
I think that's about it, because we are
honestly, because 3 of them are all on one song together.
Right. This is the last year for a lot of things. So we are still in the infant stages of crew records being, or posse cuts as they call them, being mandatory on albums. It hadn't become like this standard expected thing yet. Heavy D was big on creating it. Heavy D was like a leader of making sure there were collabs on his albums, collab tracks, and Gangstar. Gangstar was big for having the crew cuts. And so after 93, it's kind of like expected, you know, having Snoop have It Ain't No Fun, or, you know, when the West Coast joined in on that trend too, then it really was a standard in hip hop. Like, oh, you ain't got no features? It turned that black habit into a musical expectation. Instead of who all gonna be there, it's a who all on it. You know,
right.
This was definitely a practice during my teenage years, going to HMV or Tower Records, reading the back of the cover to see the features. But this was still kind of like a bonus for rap albums there, because people wanted to prove they could hold the album on their own. So,
which she really kind of did, because she has so much variety in her skill set that it's like,
yeah. And you can tell by the way albums were packaged back then, the features weren't most albums with features didn't even have them. You got to read the liner notes inside. Right. It's not going to be on the back cover.
Right.
You gotta, oh, oh wow, I didn't know. So this is also a Queen move here. Queen saying, okay, if I'm gonna have features, I'm going to have the biggest in the game. She's like, I'm Queen Latifah. I am equal to Heavy D. I am equal to KRS. At the time, Heavy D and KRS were some of the biggest rappers. We're talking about, Heavy D off of In Living Color theme and movie soundtracks, and KRS returning to Boom Bap album. Like, they were leading figures in hip hop. If the only one missing might have been like LL Cool J. So, but instead she puts on her own crew, Tretch, who arguably was a leader in hip hop. He was the leader of the new class by that point. When I think about the way Tretch approached his verse on here, I was like, man, you know what? Tretch was the way we go ooh over like Kendrick lyricism. That was that level back then. He was the
he was ahead of the game. He was ahead. Like,
yeah,
he was ahead, way ahead.
He was the upstart at that point. So it's like, oh, let the young upstart go first. He sets it off. KRS is like the seasoned cherry on top, So, but truth be told, Queen killed everybody on that track.
Oh, she did. And then KRS complimented her killing it at the end with his ad-libs.
Yeah.
Like, he was bigging her up at the end, all the way to the fade out.
She had the most focused verse, even though, Tretch is attacking it aggressively flow-wise. What he's saying is kind of filler stuff, and I feel the same way about with KRS. It sounds almost like KRS freestyle, his verse.
Very much so.
Which he's so good at it, he could have pulled that off. Very few rappers can freestyle a verse and it sounds good. I'm looking at you, Snoop. And instead of proving it, like on her verse, she could have easily said something like, now let me show you what a woman can do. She didn't do that. She just ripped. And Heavy D was also in his transitional period. This is his era of trying to stay afloat in the rough tide. This was
because he had a few songs like that were in the vein of this verse. And it was just like, oh, because even in the another song leading up to this era that helped propel her in this era, A Black Rain. What was that? It was a Flavor Unit like posse.
Roll with the Flavor. Yeah,
roll with the Flavor, right? And you hear him singing it, and if I was watching something, D-Nice was like, you're not used to hearing, him rap like that, Heavy D rap like that, but he's doing it now, and it's like you could tell like that wasn't what he regularly rapped about, at least on record, that we heard.
Heavy D would be, this is his Blue Funk era, and Heavy D is a great parallel to Queen Latifah, because I feel like he is the equivalent figure in hip hop with the same kind of stature and status, right? They both, did a lot of the same things at the same time, and so while they both always authentically showed up as themselves, this nonetheless was still transitional for them, because this is the era of Onyx and you're trying to figure out where you stand, because an album ago you were wearing you were wearing get-ups an album ago and making dance music, and you're trying to stay relevant, and they did it in a way where it wasn't this crazy pivot, and it's respectable. It's really respectable, because it's like, okay, Queen Latifah, we'll talk about this in the next category, because it's like, she's mentioning guns, but she's careful with how she mentions it. She said, "Get a cap for my protection, because it's rough in my," it's not like I got guns.
Well, it's interesting. Another thing, I'm so glad you said that about Heavy D, because I agree. I hadn't thought about that in terms of their stature, and that's interesting that she brought him on, right? Them being comrades in the music, right? But someone who is similar to her, someone that is an OG, and someone that is new. Yeah.
There you go. So contemporary and OG, because KRS preceded her, and the upstart. So Tony Rebel, I think.
So he is the one that brings the reggae with his voice, right? Because the way Queen is singing, she's singing jazzy.
Yes, from the first note, right? Which we'll get into, because Queen dabbles in that too. but he authenticates the reggae there. And this is also an era where people were getting a lot of Jamaicans just to capture that sound. Especially the West Coast. West Coast, I feel like they grab, hey, anybody with dreads, and they'd say anything. Wicked styles, right? But
Queen was always genuine with it though, right? Like there's always been that connection. Her first 2 albums, you can't get away from that.
Right.
You know, I hear Sister Carol, you know what I'm saying? And she doesn't do that so much on this album, but she does. I'm trying to think of the other song where you hear a little bit of that in the chorus.
Listen to me.
Okay, listen to me. Yes, exactly. So she's like, she does keep that continuity that she has. That's part of her repertoire, right? Yeah. And then explicitly have a reggae artist on it. Like,
and it was such a, again, Queen on this album. Queen is flexing her status and ability. She's like, well, if I'm gonna have features, they're gonna make sense, they're gonna matter, they're gonna be on my level, you know. So I'm not just gonna get anybody with locks to do the reggae part. I'm gonna get one of the leading figures in that era of dancehall and lovers rock, Tony Rebel, you know. So and it matched. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that pairing? Did they mesh well?
It's funny. I remember being a kid and I really liked that song. I still probably got a cassette somewhere over here with it, dubbing it from this radio, you know, listening to it on the radio. And it was like, it's one of those songs, and because of that pairing and because of who Queen, all the things that you just said, who she was, her deliberateness at this stage in her career, and who she brought on to feature, like Queen was always that artist that my mom could like too. So that song, hearing Weekend Love, like that was a song we could definitely listen together. I'm listening to Onyx and everybody else by myself. My mom was like, don't listen to that shit. But we could listen to Weekend Love.
Yeah, and I remember how big a deal this single was, and we'll talk about this in the next couple dimensions. Because even though Queen had been doing this on both her other albums, this is the first successful single. This is the first single that she released with singing, you know, like all she's doing is singing. There's no rap. and so it was a deviation from the same. But
it got play. It got rotation.
Yeah, you said it earlier. I think her decidedly approaching her verses from a jazz standard feel made for a unexpected contrast with Tony Rebel's traditional reggae approach, and it blended. It was a mashup before we had that term.
I mean, if you think about like Dawn Penn, you know she has an accent, but it's not dominant, right? And she has these soft songs, and you hear it was in alignment with those type of songs that were out, even by, you know, Caribbean artists at the time.
Yeah, Maxi Priest.
It was a wave of songs that had a similar sonic, that was similar sonically.
Lovers rock is one of those styles of music that keep jazz instruments alive. You will hear horns in some lovers rock.
Lovers rock, yep.
So, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, the features on this album, and whether or not they help or hurt.
You mean for the features that are on there, or
for the features that are on there?
Okay, that's solid.
5.
4.
Okay. And that takes us into dimension 7, the question of, do the weakest songs on this album bring it down? Does the weakest song on this album bring it down? Are there any weak songs on this album? What's the track that you found yourself skipping?
I know there is one, and it's somewhere in the middle. And maybe I probably skipped it more back in the day. I'm trying to remember. There is one song that I'm just like, okay.
For me, it's Bring the Flavor.
I can see. Okay.
Yeah, there's something. I think that's one of the. When we were talking about tracks that add to that overall, okay, this is a lot of this feel. That's one of those tracks. It just doesn't have its own sonic identity.
Yeah, I might. You know what song I have to? It's actually a very effective song, It's definitely a song of its time. Coochie Bang.
Yeah, Coochie Bang would be my next choice. I was when I saw the title, I wondered where the song was going, because I'm like, I've only heard this term from the Naughty by Nature song, and it's clever enough to borrow from the Naughty by Nature song and nod to it like, yes, this is where this is from. But here's what we're doing with that term and making it into a whole different direction. But how it lands is the question, right? And so those are the questionable songs. You know, this out of all the dimensions is the most subjective, but the question that's really being asked here is, are these songs weak enough to put a dent in the album? And we already talked about the cohesiveness not really feeling disrupted. So, you know,
I don't think, okay, let's say Coochie Bang, right? It even sounds weird coming out of my mouth, right? There's not a lot of dated hooks, but it's a dated hook because of the language, right? And in the delivery too. It's very that time. It's very 93, right? So, but because there's other songs on it that feel of the time as much as they are classic, timeless songs, it's even keeled. I don't think it ruins it. It's like, oh, okay, you here. You reminded me that I'm listening to something from 1993.
There you go. I think
and it's relative. It's like, okay, this was 93. Okay, you're okay. It's not a bad thing. It's got an anthem. Okay.
What a perfect term. Yeah, even killed would be a great way to put it. And ironically, after what you just said, Bring the Flavor is the other song with the second most dated hook. Bring the Flavor, right?
Flavor, right.
So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. The weakest song conversation. It's a 5 if the weak song has no effect and doesn't weigh the album down at all. It's a 1 if it plummets the album, if it sinks the album. So does Coochie Bang bring it down from being a 5 in any way, even by a point?
When I let it play, it's okay. If I first hear it, I'll be like, skip. 3.5. 4.
3.5 is what came first. So
I feel like I'm being harsh. It's
okay to be harsh. We have to be like the scale is so we can have an honest assessment of stuff without the nostalgia, right? It takes us to dimension 8, Mass Appeal. How much of a chance did this album have? Like, was this an album you could tell was designed to go different places, to reach a wide audience? We're thinking 93. It's not riding a wave, but it's definitely in the zone of what albums were doing at the time, right? It's checking off all the boxes of the sound. It's not experimental in that way. But singles wise, we think of how this was presented. The first single being Black Hand Side. And I remember Video Soul interviews, and the language being used was, "Oh, Queen, this is your reintroduction. This is your album. We haven't heard from you in a couple years." And it's not really a comeback, because this is the era where it was expected for rappers to take a 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, that was the standard practice in hip hop. You take 2 years between each album and you do your thing. But because hip hop had changed so much, I think there's what are we gonna do now? So Black Hand Side is your subtle single. Soft enough to hit the radio, very catchy with everything that she's doing. We talked about how the Set It Off is just as much as a hook as the men in the background saying, "Give me 5 on the Black Hand Side. Give me 5 on the Black Hand Side." And there's even a breakdown at the end, and it ends with the clap in the same way it comes with the clap. And there's a whole
the whole ending, very, very of the time, but in a classic way, right?
Yeah. And in the middle of your first verse, "Who got my back?" Jersey got your back. Tell me who got
All the
it.
call and response. Yep.
The whole song is a chant. It's a rally. It's a call to action. And then she's using that video as a dedication to her brother. So Black Panther Side sets it off. I don't remember it getting a lot of radio play. I remember it getting a lot of video play. And
I remember hearing it on the radio a lot, though.
A lot?
Quite often.
Really?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Now, to you viewers, me and Indigo from the tri-state area originally. So this is the era where radio itself was in a transitional period. Our dominant station was Kiss FM and WBLS, and Kiss FM was in this weird mode where they were like, we are getting ready to not play rap during our primetime regular airplay hours. We have our mix show with Red Alert for that. If you want to hear that, WBLS, I forget who the DJ was it Chuck Chill Out?
I'm trying to remember 93. I don't remember off the top.
Right. This is the Wendy Williams era. This is before she became the super gossip queen. She was just kind of radio jockeying, and hip hop would come on at night. You can still use the N-word in hip hop. You can still have guns in videos. It's like the last year for everything. Because right after this, logos were getting blurred out. The N-word was getting blurred out. It was a really distinct time in hip hop because it was so new and it was growing so fast that I don't think the outlets knew what to do with it, right? But I remember this getting a lot of BT video play, and of course Ralph McDaniels. Shout out to Ralph McDaniels. Me and Indigo did a dedication to him. We were fortunate enough to perform for Uncle Ralph a few years back in our heyday.
Several years back. I don't want to date myself, but yes.
A few years back, right? So the next single being the monster mega smash, U.N.I.T.Y.
That was like a storm, real talk. Like
it was.
I mean, I'm gonna say it from my perspective as a young girl, right? Not yet teenager yet, right? The way Queen hit, the way that song hit sonically, everybody, like, you were singing it in school.
Yeah.
You were singing it after school. The video come on in the house, y'all singing it. Like, you couldn't escape that song. And it definitely was, in a way that Ladies First was that anthem that, like, literally gave me empowerment as a little girl. Like, U.N.I.T.Y. was like, oh, the next step. Like, it was like the next step in her evolution as a young woman. Like, okay, I'm in my 20s. Like, that joint, like, yo, it shifted us as kids. And so hearing that, hearing that single, I mean, you couldn't escape hearing the song anywhere.
If we're talking from a mass appeal standpoint,
okay,
this harkens back to everything we've been talking about this whole episode. When you're taking a risk to use a jazz horn or saxophone, this single places that use of that instrument in a way that's undeniable. And I believe this is a sample from a jazz song, actually. And the way they use that, it's gripping from the first time you hear it. You know, some melodies you got to hear on the radio 15 times a day to get used to. As soon as you hear that, it commands your ear, right? And so sonically, it's waiting for somebody to do something to it. The hook that Queen Latifah used is borrowed from another song too.
It's called U.N.I.T.Y. Desmond Decker, and it's a reggae song.
Right. So again, doing what this whole album does, this single is a microcosm of the whole album. It's the blending of reggae and jazz with the roughness. It's mid-tempo with up-tempo energy. That's the whole.
She got bark. Like, she's barking. Like, she wasn't barking like that on the last two albums.
Right.
And so to see now, she doesn't have her headdress on. She is bark. She's like, who you calling a, like, it was just like in your face.
Yeah, and if we talk about the video, she's stylized. She's wearing like a leather, stepping into her femininity in a different way than we've seen before. Previous albums, you know, she's wearing shorts. That's probably the closest we get.
Her hairstyle is different.
She's showing her hair.
How she looks is the energy of the song too.
Right, because it's a softer look for her, but it's not a soft look at all.
Some of the other softness comes in the other songs, like the videos. right. The extra softness.
The way she's dressed, she's not dressed up, is what I'm saying in the U.N.I.T.Y.
But it was fly though, because she's on the bike in that video too, and she had already started transitioning. You know, like we all do as we come of age, right? Transitioning, and I think about, ironically, even her counterpart, you know, Apache, right? What was the whole conversation about gangster music, like calling women bitches? This was the answer. So the media production media now had something else to pit against gangster rap.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I guess I can say pit, because some people were like, oh wow, okay, now this is a woman talking about like don't call women bitches.
But
you know, but it was a response that wasn't that was as inherent as Queen was about her stuff, right? About her life and her music, but also like it had nobody was so brash about the topics we talked about in U.N.I.T.Y, and I think that was part of the mass appeal also.
But that's not a word I would use. That's the ironic part. But there's something about this song that commanded the respect of both genders at the time. I never ever heard of in a lot of ways, this song is more respected by male listeners than Ladies First. I just saw a thing where it said like Willie D made a super disrespectful response to Ladies First because Ladies First played into this gender war kind of ideology that we come first. One comes first above the other. This was a song like, no, give me my respect. That's all I'm asking for. And I think the conscious decisions made, I think the same way you explain how Can't Understand has 3 movements, this song has 3 movements. If Queen would have decided to use the whole song as this like diatribe rant against abusive men, it would have been put in a section as a special song. Like when I think of Love Is Blind by Eve, people like that song, but they think it's a special song. I need to be in a mood to listen to that. It's about domestic abuse. This song surpasses that because she speaks about 3 different forms of self-respect. This is a self-respect song while still commanding respect from others. And I think because she didn't make the visuals to it targeted at any specific group, it became this universal song. Like if the whole song depicted these monster men doing these atrocious things to women, then it would have just been a song that I think mostly women like, and men are like, okay. But everyone loves this song. And I remember that
the video
reception when it came out. Yeah.
The video reflects that. It's mad people in Jersey, right? It's this Jersey in the background. Even when Vinny as a protagonist touches her butt, you don't even see her punch him. She just says that she's dead in the eye. Right? You don't see the actual violence, the violence that she's speaking to. Right? You literally see her speaking. Right.
And then the second verse, she's in like some elevator on the construction site. Because again, this is the era where you got to be in like a abandoned building or a junkyard to do your videos. So she's not above that. She's a queen in the junkyard, and she's talking to this person we can't see. So this is any abuser, USA, but she's putting herself in the picture, and we know it's not her because like by the time you hear like the 4th bar, you're like, wait, she don't have kids and a husband. So it's like, oh, she's speaking as that woman.
The fact of the matter, she already made the move that she needed to make.
Right.
And that's what we end up as the viewer watching.
Got you. Just like how you said in the first verse, she avoids showing the violence. She's showing you the other part that matters. The fact that, okay, in the first verse, I'm a woman that's not going to tolerate that. I'm going to react. The second verse, I'm a woman that's gonna not tolerate that. I'm moving on. I've already made the move. Right. The 3rd verse, she's speaking about women on women violence. But again, none of these verses sound preachy. She's putting herself in the picture, even in that verse. She's like, I saw you out my window. I'm watching. Even it's one of the few times where you could say young lady in a verse and not sound like finger wagging. I don't know. I never get.
Because it's almost like she's talking about contemporary. Because some people thought she was talking about Boss, right? That was also one of those things. I was like, who's she talking about? Maybe she's talking about Boss, because Boss was the one person that was getting that kind of critique. Yeah. And she mentions Apache. Oh, you heard Apache and you think you call yourself a gangster bitch, right? So
it's fire. Yeah. Like, I mean,
there's a lot going on in that last verse.
There's a lot going on in that last verse because it's a hidden big up to her boy Apache while still bringing the light, like you said, that pitting, right? This is the diametrically opposed song. This is the antithesis to your other track.
Without
dissing
our homeboy.
Actually, not even. Because I don't think there's a line on this album too where Queen says something about if you want to bring the gangsta B out of me, that's what I'll be in that instance. So I think Queen is coming from a place where she respects that gangsta B's exist, but she's talking to the wannabe.
Well, no, and she says, is it this song or was it the song from Set It Off? She's like, you either get like the best version of me, like the happy-go-lucky, the best friend or something like that, or you get the gangster bitch. I think she says it explicitly.
Right.
But it's depending on what you do, like act accordingly.
So she has a respect and an acknowledgement that yes, these women exist in these roles, but you ain't got no business trying to be that. That's her standpoint.
And honestly, low-key, I think it's her. Again, I think this album is a reflection of her. Right? While having watched like some interviews with like Tretch over the years talking about like, nah, Queen will square up with a dude. You've seen it. But has she ever said that to us? No.
Yeah. There's an art to being able to make something that's empowering one gender without turning off another. So I think
so she's masterful at doing it like in her whole career.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And so you get that. Can't Understand is one of those tracks that because U.N.I.T.Y was such a mega hit, it not getting as much radio play didn't seem like a come down. It was just like, okay, this kind of is the middle child of this album. Because do you remember this one getting played on the radio? Because I don't.
I remember it. Like, I remember the song existing, but I don't have like that memory you have when you're a kid listening. Like, okay, I heard that several times and I remember singing it. Like, no, I remember probably hearing it on the album, and that's about it.
It was supposed to be probably the most radio friendly song because even though U.N.I.T.Y is anthemic, it is a moody beat. It's not the norm. It's not the standard radio format song.
But it's that song that broke through because of the message.
Yes, and all the other elements that we talked about. But Can't Understand was the one that fit all the formula of that day that it was supposed to.
And it feels that way, and that's why I think it sounds like the most commercial song on the album.
Even though I will say that Queen's singing on there is a little unorthodox. It's not the kind of singing that was for hooks of that era, and so props to her for still kind of doing her own thing with that, because it's that jazzy influence style of singing. Even the way it comes on, it starts with her voice first before those 90s horns come on, right? It says, hey. It's a really important song too, which is ironic because this first verse is her response to
Big Mama.
Big Mama. It is a queenly response to a song that was, woo.
Yeah, she just was like, you and you and you. Yeah, like
Roxanne
Shante, that's what she's known for, right? Like, I mean, she came in the game like, I'm gonna call you out. I'm gonna talk about you. What? Like, I'm that battle rapper, right? And so, just building on what you said, Queen's response was queenly, even in her timing. It wasn't even a quick response. She made sure she put it on an album a year and a half later.
Yes. She made sure that it was a single to remind you. But again, another. Oh man, I think brilliant decisions were made here. This is maybe her most lighthearted and playfully approached song, even in the way she's going about it. And it's kind of like a shoe fleet. And because this song didn't work out for Roxanne Shante the way she wanted it to, it becomes kind of a insult to injury, like knife twist kind of thing, right? 'Cause she's like, she says a lot. We can talk about this in the next dimension, but the way she approached it, you kind of don't need the other parts. But this song also does that thing that I mentioned, where it has topical and content relevance. Because by the time she gets to the third verse, she's talking about the state of the world. She's like, why do people do this to each other? Blah, blah, blah. The second verse is, hey, I'm going to remind you, I like dating, and I have needs and I have a life. But it's a big "You Played Yourself" song, which were really big in the early 90s. Like almost every rapper had to have a one "You Played Yourself" song.
Right.
You went out on a date and then you couldn't, like.
Right. The fact that she put it within that first verse of a response in a bigger context, right? I can't explain. Like, this is just shit that just boggles my mind. This and the shit. Like, you're not so big, I'm gonna dedicate a whole song to you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? A verse, a lighthearted verse on a lighthearted song, right? Where my song with Tretch, that song got even more bark than U.N.I.T.Y. She could have did it on that. That was deliberate.
Which winds up being, it's on the B side. So both in its nicely, again, pristinely packaged way, this is Queen saying, here's your response. You get a rough one and you get a playful one, but this is all you're gonna get. They don't even add up to a song together. You get a verse and a piece of a verse. There you go.
So a year and a half later, and not to diss at all Roxanne Shante, because I got so much respect for her, but at that time, looking at the career trajectory, you see where, and even I saw somewhere like even with Black Rain, Queen Latifah had a milestone, first woman to do like gold. 6 months later, the Brat did it. So it was an interesting kind of like, you got Roxanne Shante, who was like the leader, who paved the way, right? She feels like she's not getting respect from other women, but things are happening at a speed like she can't dictate the way culture moves, you know. So Queen made a milestone, and then 6 months later, the Brat comes in.
And for clarity, that milestone is for female solo rapper.
Right, exactly.
Salt and Pepper, of course. Right. But yeah, this album goes on and is a mega hit, because we're also talking about early 90s where formulas prevailed. And the formula was you get 3 singles. Queen broke that. Queen was doing Beyonce level stuff at this point in time. Video premieres and having 6 singles, or 5 technically, but because you have B-sides, you get a good amount of your album off. You get half the album out. When artists are able to do that, especially rap artists, they had hit a successful stride. And so U.N.I.T.Y. is what we can credit for giving this album more mass appeal, because if not for that song, you might not have gotten to A Week in Love. A standard record label at that time would have considered Week in Love too experimental for a rap artist. Like, what do we do with this song? But this is how big of a name Queen had made herself.
But she was still getting critiqued for singing so much. Even then, it was still like, it's again parallel to Miseducation. She's singing so much, and people like, why don't you just do a jazz album? I remember hearing that, right?
That's crazy.
I remember hearing that, but it was just like, the whole thing was dope. Do you need to separate and within one album be like, oh, you can only do this? It was still a time in hip hop '93 where things was still delineated hardcore. Yeah,
definitely. Rap sung, we didn't even have a word for it, even though many of
people
our friends were doing that, right? But because they weren't outright showing their vocal skills like Queen, who is a trailblazer for that. We'll talk about that in the next dimension. But credence has to be given to the fact that this was also the first album under Motown, and so Motown, the execs there and the brats there, maybe understanding those nuances more, might have been more supportive of that direction anyway, because they're a label that might have understood it, even though they're not really famous for understanding rap.
But they were trying to leading up to Queen coming on. Because remember, I don't know, and I was trying to remember if I remember this even as a kid, MC Trouble was technically the first female rapper that they signed, right? And then she died. She tragically died.
Rest in peace. I remember that being
rest in peace.
I remember that being the first hip hop death I was cognizant of being sad, because I liked the 2 videos that I saw from her on Video Music Box. I think she had a single with the Good Girls too, and I had a crush on the Good Girls, man. But yeah, this having that Motown machine gave her a different energy and probably gave her a different extended reach. So that's what we're seeing when we're thinking about Mass Appeal. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. What you giving this on a scale from 1 to 5 for Mass Appeal?
Mass Appeal, because them singles brought her all the way up to the status that she is. I got to give it a 5.
All right, that takes us straight into my favorite dimension, Dimension 9, the 3 I's: impact, innovation, influence. All right, so you had touched on this a second ago. You said as a young girl, as a young lady, not young lady.
You're speaking like Queen Latifah on the album. Young lady.
You know, as a young woman, like hearing this hits different for you, of course, right? U.N.I.T.Y. and also just what Queen Latifah represents. And I'm saying, as a young man, the visuals, seeing this woman lead a motorcycle crew and being in the interviews with Donnie Simpson saying, yeah, this is what I do. I've been doing this for years, relaxation. I'm like, and so when we talk about the impact of this album, I think there was an anticipation for this because Queen was a leading figure in hip hop. This is before we really thought in these distinctions. For all the delineations that hip hop had, I don't recall in my youth, at least, there being this, oh, she's a female MC. When we saw Kane and MC Light, they were the rappers, they were the stars. That's just it. That's who's on the lineup. That's who's on this song. The impact of just, we need a Queen Latifah in hip hop. Her just being there and showing staying power to get to a third album had impact. But the fact that the third album winds up being the biggest one, that's the big deal. So this is a huge album. I feel like the sales don't match up to the actual impact that this album made when it first came out and to this day. You know, so one thing that has to be mentioned is these singles started creeping up as the summer was coming, winding down. Living Single premiered August of that year. So that TV show debuts a whole 2 or 3 months before this album even comes out, but the singles are buzzing. And maybe this is a nod to her Flavor Unit team, to the Motown team that was behind her, but timing is everything. These are the kind of strategic moves we see artists do nowadays, and we've seen them doing since the 2000s that I don't think artists were savvy enough to think to do in the 90s. It's like, oh, I'm gonna have my return album come out the same time. That's like Whitney Houston level stuff. That's what Whitney was doing with the Bodyguard soundtrack, you know? And so it was the perfect storm. It was perfect timing. You're getting to know her, and it only helps that her theme for that show sounds just like her biggest.
And I was waiting to bring that up because that's a key factor, you know, to her success, period, and the success of that album. Like, what she embodies in the album is also what you see in the show, right? And it, again, with us saying earlier, like, the album is sort of like this microcosm of her career, right? Like, at the time, current, and post, is like, wait a minute, she's flourishing. We see it on the show. We hear her complexity of her character in the album, and it all works synergistically. Like, and you're right, it's the timing. And I do think that was, I wasn't there, right? But in terms of who asked her to be on the show, Will Smith had already done that, right? Was doing that. So there were hints of people being like, oh, you can be, I mean, in the 70s, there was always artists, period, and specifically Black artists, you know, who were actors, who were musicians, who did what they want to do. As crazy as shit that we end up seeing with Bill Cosby, he was doing that shit. I mean, he wasn't a singer, but being a comedian and doing all the 20 million shows that he did.
Being a multi-hyphenate, yeah.
Multi-hyphenate, it's like that. And that's also the lineage of Black artists.
Yeah.
Right? Like, seriously, like, I remember, I don't know if you remember this. I remember when Motown, I think it was Motown, not 25, but like, I forgot what year they were celebrating their anniversary. And I think they were featured at a Super Bowl, and Queen Latifah had just got signed. I have it on VHS at my mom's house. We used to watch that video all the time because it was like they did it like a tribute to Motown that still to this day is one of the best like mini documentaries I've seen. We got it on VHS, right? Wow. And so like they featured towards the end, it was like the new generation, and Queen Latifah was at the end. And she sung a little bit of Stevie, she sung off 10 Million Light Years Away, and how they were looking for somebody of this kind of caliber, and she was it.
Wow.
Right? And so for me, again, seeing that as a young girl was like, damn, this is dope. She is a part of that lineage of here. And they said it, actress, singer, rapper, right? They were looking for somebody like that because they also kind of saw that in MC Trouble, but she passed away.
Right. So then there's the innovation quality that Queen is able to fulfill this role that was not previously fulfilled. She pioneers this, and I think she winds up staying with Motown for a while after that. Yep. And she's for some periods she's like their only rap act that makes it. They tried. There's a lot of failed Motown rap acts, and she was up there when they would have like the panels, the reflective posters of their history. She's there. Her, it's Boyz II Men, and Diana Ross. You know what I mean? Like she's right.
She held it down for a while.
Yes, and so innovation abounds here. This is the first leading female rapper that we see leading her own sitcom, right? You talk about innovation. I think the prominence of jazz and her using jazz vocal stylings and pure jazz at the end of the album, that's innovation in a different way. It's a different level. It's like, no, I'm gonna bring real jazz musicians in there and do a jazz piece. I'm on my Malcolm Jamal Warner-ish.
That's it. Yep.
So on half the tracks here, I think most of the hooks are her singing.
Yeah, no, they are. They really are. I mean, some of like the posse and you know, but I'm going to touch on a little bit on, you know, Winky's theme, the jazz song, because I think it was absolutely deliberate, paralleling to what I was talking about, where like Motown was looking for a certain type of artist, right? And she was that artist. And I remember her being on Arsenio Hall, and it was such a big deal that she was going to sing that song on Arsenio Hall at that time in 1993. She didn't rap. She didn't do any of the songs. She sung Winky's theme. I will never forget that because again, it had impact on me. And it was like, wait a minute, this rapper, I remember the headlines, this rapper, she's going to sing jazz. Like again, the precursor to the rest of her career, right? Whether she's on in Chicago, whether she's on, you know, winning Emmys, she's doing an explicit jazz album later on. Yes. She's playing Bessie Smith, like, and even the fact bringing that full circle, like her being asked around that time to play Bessie Smith, she knew she didn't have it yet to play her. Right? Again, her album being like this glimpse of like where it could go. She knew she wasn't at Winky. She sung Winky's theme, but she wasn't at Winky's theme in terms of her whole career.
Right.
Right?
It was still
like she was still in either act 1 or 2.
It was
she was either just where the first interlude was, and that second, and she was like,
It was still a gasp moment, like, oh, she's gonna do this? What's this?
Yes.
This
Oh my God. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Where now it's oh, you rap? I think there's fewer people that know she even raps. So when you hear it, it's kind of like it feels abrasive to some people.
Right. That's just like, oh shit.
Right.
And like when she did K Slay, like everyone's like, oh, that's Queen.
Right. So the impact of this album is it's intertwined with the legacy that U.N.I.T.Y leaves, because there has not been another song doing what it did. There have been plenty of songs that kind of approach similar subject matter, but not anthemic, not catchy, and not as successful, and it's accepted and embraced by like so many different demographics. So let's talk about influence. The influence. We still hear people to this day talk about how influential the songs from this album are. You know, shoot, the visuals from the singles, you know, Just Another Day. I remember Just Another Day being used in New York Undercover, and it fit the mood of that scene so perfectly, to the point that I think her video looked like part of an episode of New York episode, New York Undercover. And shout out to Queen Latifah, because she shouted out my father's restaurant in that song.
Oh, dope.
You know, I could just go to Steak and Take for a bean pie, you know.
Yep.
Bring Steak and Take all over New York. But yeah, man, the visuals last, and you know, as much as I hate to separate or use this terminology, the female rappers that have come in the years to follow always credit this song. If they don't know this album, they at least credit the song U.N.I.T.Y for being a launching point in their lives, and deciding to approach hip hop as confidently as Latifah made it so cool to look.
I mean, like, what you do with A RAP CRITIC is so important, because, like, you know, before we started today, I was thinking about like the current stream of women that are out there in the vastness, right? Which I love right now. You know, there's so many. Obviously, there's some that are more well known than others, but there's a mixture that we haven't seen in probably since this time, right? And so, like, I'm like, damn, not enough people. Like, Queen is still an unsung hero, like you said. A lot of people know her from movies or just singing. You know, she's doing low-key stuff behind the scenes, and it's like, wait a minute, but her entry point was so impactful that I need, you know, I don't want to say any rappers' names out, but I need XXXXX to know about these specific things about her career.
Yeah.
About this album and the ones before it.
This is the album. This is the album that made her an icon.
Yep.
That's what's crazy, is that she was already a standout figure. Like I said, hip hop needed a Queen Latifah. Like, she didn't ask.
Ladies first, she was in there. Like, people sang the hook like that. Yeah. That's an anthem.
She didn't ask. She didn't beg. She didn't huff and puff and blow the door down either. She just stepped in. She lived up to her name. And this album, even though it was transitional, and she was, you know, still dabbling in the I gotta be rough at times, it kept a regality to it. And because the songs and the timing was so perfect, she became an icon from this point, to the point she didn't have to release another rap album ever again.
Right.
And she barely did, you know.
I was gonna say, she barely did. She did.
Order in the Court is her last rap album.
Right.
Yeah, there's a bunch of influence, there's a bunch of impact, there's a bunch of innovation, all from this one album. Something for y'all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. When you think about those 3 eyes, it's what we giving this on a scale from 1 to 5.
Impact, undeniable 5. Innovation, right? Might bring it down to a 4. The other 2 are 5s, and that's a 4. So what's that, 4.5? I'm making shit up, but it's a 4.5.
Okay. 4.5 takes us to the final dimension in this category, dimension 10, the overall uniqueness and timelessness. Now, I think I heard you use this word earlier. I think I heard you use 2 of these words. You said there's a lot of songs on here with a timeless quality, and there's a few songs with a dated quality. As a body of work, does this album last the test of time? When we put it in, you know, is it like the cringe 90s feel? Or is it like, okay, I can tell this was done in the 90s, but ...
I think it's the ... You know, those songs that sound like the 90s and that are still in the 90s. Like, they don't bruise the album. They just remind you that it was a different time. And, you know, if you want to skip over those, but there is a particular, I like the fact that Just Another Day and U.N.I.T.Y come right after each other. Like, the synergy of that is totally awesome. Like, if you just took that and then you took like Black Hand Side, like, I would actually put a few of those songs together and then give to somebody, like somebody younger. Minus, and, you know, not those songs, but minus the songs that sound like it came from '93.
Right.
Strictly with the sounds and everything. You take those very classic songs, even the jazz song, you package that. Mm-hmm. Let's say we put like 6 of the songs solidly together. That's dope. It's solid. The other songs don't hurt, right? You can be like, okay, other time, like, okay, don't understand, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say if there's at least 5 to 6 songs that are timeless on an album that have an energy, a synergy to them together, as well as separately, you do have a classic album.
Wow. That's a bold statement.
I do think, because I think there's so many albums, because remember, it's 15 songs. It's not 9 or 10 songs like some of the classic songs.
Right.
So you gotta kind of give a little bit of leeway for.
If you think about another super 1993 album that sounds super 1993, Tupac, Strictly for My Niggas. That's an album that you don't hear even Tupac fans really talk about, because the majority of that album is mired in dated sounds that were just only of the time. And I think this is what we were speaking to earlier when we talked about there's a fullness here. There's a musicality. All the songs are rounded out. There's a rounded feeling that these are complete tracks. And even the way they end, right? Like you said, the way that Just Another Day, it doesn't cut off. It like does that weird spacey zone out, that right? And the way it comes in, it has that
vibe.
Right. And then U.N.I.T.Y comes in right after it, and it's strong, but it's also soft at the same time. And I think about No Work, they decided to cut No Work short, and I'm like, that's really a good ending for that kind of song. You know, you don't want that to go any longer than it needs to. I can't understand. You don't want that to go any longer than it needs to. And we talked about how Black Hand Side begins and ends. So there's like intention in a lot of the stuff here. They wanted to make songs here. They didn't just want to have Latifah rapping over beats. And because some of the cheat code is used, those songs last longer. And I think, you know, just like what we were saying on the weakest song conversation, because it doesn't hurt and because it creates even killed, if the majority of the songs on this album are musical in nature, it creates a timelessness effect. As far as what Latifah and crew are saying on the album, some of that tips the scales towards dated. This is the era where rappers felt like they had to say the year.
Oh yeah, she says 92 to 93.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, she probably said 92, and remember, like, the album's about to be released next year.
Right. Until Q-Tip famously said it this year on the Midnight Marauders album. He's like, oh, I can't say the year because Large Professor told me not to say the year. Remember he said that on the Midnight Marauders album? But, like, clearly people didn't heed his advice. I heard, like, Busta Rhymes recently still saying the year. I was like, Busta, the Q-Tip.
You know what? At this point, it's part of the archival archiving process. So just say it like that if you're doing it now.
and I mean, to be a rap in this era, you have to say the year big. You're not just saying it. It's 93. You're like 1993.
Big lights.
So all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. When we think about the timelessness and overall uniqueness of this album, what you giving it for that?
I'm being honest, those classics take it a long way. Every album's gonna sound like it's time no matter what. I'm gonna give it a 4.
Oh, hardcore. All right. And that concludes our Category 1 review of Black Rain by Queen Latifah in the middle of Women's History Month. Join us for video 2, where we go over Category 2, which is the rap performance on this album. Until then, y'all know what it is. Me and Indigo will be back. F a rap critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to the Met.